All right, knowing that our time is precious and that we only have an hour together, we're going to go ahead and get started. If you've not had a chance to do so, please sign in using the QR code, or we're going to have Laura drop the link into the chat. Again, we are awarding sketchies for this 1 hour session, so we need you to fill out that form if you're interested in those. Make sure it's filled out completely. If not, we still ask that you complete the form so we have your information. We use that data to really kind of give us some information about what sessions are well attended and which ones we need to lift a little bit more into our learning stream platform. Just to let you know, we are incredibly blessed to have this session being made possible through grant funds through the Literacy Learning Network. So we are able to offer this at no cost because of our grant through this organization. Introductions are in order. Hi, everybody. My name is Mary Lou Strimbel. I am a literacy consultant for Wayne Risa. My background is in both elementary education as well as middle school education, so I kind of straddle the line. And this is my third year here at Wayne Risa, and happy to be with you today, sharing our learning around flexible grouping in the ELA secondary classroom. I'm going to invite my colleagues who are supporting in today's session to introduce themselves, and then we'll get started.
Hi, everybody. I'm Laura Gabrion. I'm a literacy consultant here at Wayne Risa, and I'm here as a support for these two amazing consultants who are going to guide you through flexible grouping.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Zainab Haydous, and I am an English learner consultant. And I'm so happy to be able to work with amazing Mary Lou and Laura on this flexible grouping session. And this is also my third year here at Wayne Risa.
So very quickly, we'd like just to get an introduction or an idea of who's in our space with us. So if you could introduce yourselves by adding your name and your grade level into the chat, that would be delightful. That way we know who's in our space together and we can lean into each other's expertise. So take a moment, add your name and your grade level into the chat. And then as you do that, just take a moment and visit the introductions of our colleagues in this space. We'll give you just a little bit of time to do that. Name, grade level. Welcome, Chelsea. Hi, Ashley. Thank you for joining us. See, second grade, sixth grade. I have a high school science teacher. 2 ELL chemistry classes this year. Wonderful. Hi, Mona. Thank you for joining us. Yvonne, 6-8 coach, welcome. All right, let's go ahead and get started. We'll keep an eye. Welcome, Vicki. High school Spanish, thank you. Dearborn Academy representation, thank you so much for giving us your information so we know who you are. We're going to go ahead and get started as we allow a little bit of a time to really kind of touch base around our agreements. Zaretta Hammond, in her book, Getting Better Together, talks about high trust and low stress environments. And by creating high trust and low stress environments, we allow for information to really process in an easier and a deeper way. So in order to facilitate that type of environment, we're going to ask that you lean into these agreements as you work together in breakout rooms and you interact with everyone in this space. So we ask that you engage in humble inquiry. So really embracing that non-closure, that we're not going to get all our answers today, but we're going to raise probably more questions, and that's great because really learning is the food for our minds, right? Also, when we think about the decisions that we make and lean into the learning from today, we want to keep in mind that it's in the best interest of our children. So making decisions around that. Staying engaged. I know when I'm on a session, I am always looking at my phone. So my new protocol is to flip my phone over when I'm in a learning space to really kind of remove those distractions. So if you need to do that, if there's something that, you hear Background, take a moment, get up, shut the door, remove those distractions, staying engaged. And always, always take care of yourself. If something comes up during the session, you lose connectivity or you have to step away from your computer, please feel free to do that. You have any kind of question as far as connectivity or you have an inquiry about the learning that's being presented, we ask that you type into the chat or wondering or re-enter the space, and then Laura will be able to help you out. Also, we're going to ask that you keep your mic muted during the presentation until you enter into those breakout rooms so that you're able to really have those wonderful conversations with your colleagues. Next, our outcomes. Through this next hour, we really hope to, as a learning target, gain a deeper understanding of the purpose and practice of flexible grouping. We'll be talking primarily in the secondary classroom, but we also, much of the information can be applied as well as an elementary background. So really thinking about how flexible groups are formed and how they can be used to accelerate our learning with our students, and really thinking about building our students' literacy development through flexible grouping. Another thing is offering really wonderful opportunities for our kids to become better readers and writers and listeners and speakers and with that intentional opportunities. So being mindful of when and how we're using flexible grouping. As always, if you have not had a chance to visit literacyessentials.org, we invite you to do that. We're going to drop that in the chat, that link. And basically, we encourage you to visit the 612 Essentials because much of the flexible grouping talk that we do today is around the 612 disciplinary literacy essential practices, which are researched, informed instructional practices. And throughout that entire document, you'll notice, if you open up the document and look at the ELA tabs, you will see that flexible grouping is woven within many of those essentials. So really, that document is what we're leaning into, but you'll also see the need for grouping in the K3, the 4-5 document as well, because those documents support each other. So let's start out with the why. So when we think about flexible grouping in a secondary classroom, thinking around why do I take some of my instructional time to build this instructional format in? And when we lean into that research, we find that it really is to support accelerating learning. And I don't know if you've heard that term yet bounced around, but because of the unknown nature of our upcoming school year, you might have heard that term, accelerated learning versus remediation. When we think about accelerated learning, we're going to lean into this common definition. Accelerated learning is keeping our students moving forward with grade level content and skills, and flexible grouping allows us to do that. And we're going to unpack that a little bit more in today's session. But it comes down to being able to build in background knowledge. So for those students who, for a myriad of reasons, weren't able to attend school or be in classroom spaces last year, they could have some, I don't want to say learning loss. I'm going to say that there might be some gaps in some of that foundational information. So flexible grouping gives us the ability to build that background knowledge without stopping the instruction at grade level for the entire group. It also allows us to demonstrate specific skills. So through formative assessment, we can see when we have some students who are in need of a reteach or possibly leaning into each other to understand skills and concepts, we can demonstrate those specific skills and then give students a space where they can apply that reteach. And also provide targeted instruction based on individual styles, not just needs. Some of our students are not as proficient in whole group instruction than they are in small group or in partner-based instruction. So flexible grouping gives an accountability to our students that they are in charge of their learning if we can give them those spaces using flexible grouping so they're comfortable and able to monitor their own learning, providing greater differentiation, and then finally fostering inquiry and student engagement. Many times our students just need a smaller group in which to be comfortable having conversations, be comfortable and know that mistakes are opportunities for learning, be comfortable raising questions. So flexible grouping allows us to do all of these things. And many times I lean into a metaphor that I heard Dr. Tanya Wright talk about. And Dr. Tanya Wright is a literacy researcher through Michigan State University. And she talks about grouping being like an eye exam. Many of us have gone through eye exams as students within schools. We walk down to the lunchroom or to the cafeteria or to the library, and we take those eye exam evaluations. Some of us didn't pass, and we were then asked to visit an ophthalmologist. So thinking about that, when those students went to the ophthalmologist, based on their eyesight evaluation, were they all given the same glasses? Were they all given the same prescription? No, they were individualized prescriptions based on their needs. And that's what grouping can do for our students. By giving our students individual needs, preference, making sure their prescription is correct, we can meet all their needs. Now, what do we mean by different grouping? Well, when we talk about needs-based, those are based on formative assessment, observation, student samples. We see where there's gaps in our students' learning. We might group our students also by interest-based. So it might be a book club, a title that they've selected, or even possibly a topic that they're searching. Another type of group is paired or partner. We might have pairs or partnership working on a research piece, or they might be solving a problem together, or they might be creating questions that will help frame their work. And then finally, level-based. So using our assessments like PSAT, iReady, possibly other assessment pieces, we might group our students based on that information. So knowing that there's a variety of grouping, flexible grouping, that are fluid, because we never want to place students in situations where they're locked into a group and never know when their exiting date is. So thinking about that, those terms flexible and fluid when we're talking about groups. So then we move on to when we're talking about flexible versus level-based. Oftentimes in elementary, we hear that people tend to, or teachers tend to put students into level-based groups, and they keep them there. We want to make sure that we're looking at our students' needs and that we realize that when we look at level-based grouping, levels are very approximate. So if we are looking at our iReady scores or our PSAT scores, those are approximate depending on the type of text that student read, their current situation on that day that they took the text or the test. So we have to be mindful that levels occur because of a variety of reasons. So we don't want to just use level-based groups. Also, we want to make sure that when we're looking at flexible grouping, we're not focused immediately on remediation. We always want to offer opportunities for our students to really have exposure to grade level text and content. They want opportunities to grapple with that grade level text and that content to make sure that we're moving them forward. But we're providing support for that to happen within those flexible groups. We also want to make sure that our groups are fluid so our students aren't thinking that, I'm in this red group and I'm never going to get out. We want to make sure that we're taking in consideration their self-perceptions. Who's in that group with them? How did that group get selected? How long are they in that group? We want those groups to be beneficial And that's why it's important that at the beginning of the year, we start having dialogue with our students about the benefit of grouping. When I was a middle school teacher, I used to start off with the year saying groups in my environment, in this learning family, are a positive. You want to be in a group. You want to be part of a group that will help support each other. So grouping, that's awesome. If you're in a group, celebrate. But really creating that space, that culture, that is a positive, that it's not a negative. And then really thinking about what's the purpose of my group? What's the success criteria of the students that are being put in the group? And then how am I exiting them? And how long will they be in there? So really thinking about the variety of groups and their purpose.
So I'm sure many of you have had English learners or multilingual learners in your classroom. And I did see that in the chat as well. And when it comes to flexible grouping, it is particularly important and beneficial to English learners. And with flexible grouping, students can be grouped in different types of ways. They can be grouped in heterogeneous groups, which means they are put in varying ability levels, or in homogeneous groups with similar ability levels. And this gives them more chances to interact with their classmates who speak English fluently and practice both their academic and interpersonal language. They can also be grouped with other classmates who speak the same home language as them. And in those specific groups, students will have the opportunity to discuss the content or the concepts in their home language before sharing their ideas in English, which really gives them that peer rehearsal, so that when they are going to share it in English, they are more prepared. They're not scared anymore. So that's what we would like to add for flexible grouping for English learners.
So now thinking about if we are going to invite our students to be in these spaces, now we get down to the nitty-gritty of how does this look and sound? So really thinking around establishing routines and clear expectations. And this work needs to happen from day one when we have students enter back into our classrooms, whether that is in-person learning or it's virtual learning. And I'm sure many of you have already thought around these structures that are going to be in place, but we just want to remind you of these pieces. In order for flexible grouping to really be effective, we have to make sure that we're having co-created norms and working agreements. So really asking our students, think about a really productive time that you were given to collaboratively work with peers. What worked really well, and leaning into what they know is good for their learning styles. So hearing their voices, what did that classroom or that experience look like to make it successful? And then once you have those routines in place, revisit them, have them present, make reference back to them, even have students practice them in order to build stamina from the first day of school all the way through. Because many times if we put up a chart or we say, here are our working agreements, and we don't refer back to them or have kids set goals with them, they become white noise. So really starting out small, if you're going to practice transitions, if you're in person and you're asking students to move to another area, what does that look like and sound like? Really explicitly teaching them that. If it's in a virtual space, how does that look like? What steps are we going to use virtually for that to happen? And already after the last 18 months, many of our students are experts at that, but explicitly stating, this is what it looks like in our space, and we're going to practice it because we want those flawless transitions. We don't want to lose any of our very precious instructional time and collaborative time by having to stop because it's too loud or people aren't doing what is expected. So really taking the time to make those things happen first thing, and then continuing to practice those. In the book, Distance Learning Playbook by Fisher, Fry, and Hattie, they talk about this very principle of making working agreements for groups, and they call it rules. Being open to spending time to learn is something that we want to also communicate to students, that we are going to go deeply into concepts. We want to give you that time for you to own your learning. For that to happen, we have to make sure that we have the frameworks and the structures to be in place. And it has to fit your learning, and we're talking about the individual student's learning, but also be respectful of other people's learning. So in doing that, we have to create a safe space, but I've also heard it termed as a brave space, and I like that even more. So really allowing a space for us to have courageous learning going on. Having a place where we can say to students, it's good to make mistakes. That's an opportunity to learn. It's good to answer questions. It's good to respectfully disagree with someone or ask someone to clarify their thinking, because through that, we're helping each other's learning. We're taking control of our learning. And as educators, we have to step back and become facilitators. When we think about flexible grouping, we become facilitators instead of being the force that drives that learning. We give them collaborative spaces so that they can take ownership of their own learning. That's that transforming learning into action. They then take their learning and we give them places and opportunities to take that learning and apply it, put it into action. And that really understanding that there has to be patience with ourselves and with others for learning. We're not going to go very quickly through this topic. We're going to take some time. We're going to introduce an inquiry question. We're going to take some time and present a problem. And then we're going to ask you to dive in deeply. And we're going to give you the time to talk with your peers, with other students, to really think deeply about this learning. So in Fisher and Fry and Hattie's work with the Distance Learning Playbook, it's really supporting that flexible grouping idea. But in order for this to happen, you have to have spaces that we like to call belonging classrooms. And belonging classrooms and belonging spaces are fruitful places for a higher order discourse. So when we think about using the jigsaw protocol, where we break students off and let them read certain portions of a text, or we talk about Socratic seminars where we ask them to interact with each other in discussion, or we ask peers to give each other feedback. There has to be specific norms around that. And I'm going to ask Laura to go ahead and drop in a link. And we wanted to provide you, well, what does that look like? If I'm going to ask my students to help co-create norms for conversations for higher order discussion, what does that look like? So we've provided this mentor text that you see on the screen, and we ask you to access that so you have that at your fingertips. But really allowing your students to look at the norms of conversation, have them co-write them. You could start with this document and ask them to revise it. Or you could just put this document in front of them and say, are we in agreement that all of us agree that this is what it's going to look like when we have a respectful and brave space in which to collaborate in? I've also been party to having teachers be in teacher spaces with their students where they've actually posted their norms, and each of their students have put a signature on the norms as a binding contract. So really thinking about that they're being respectful and that they have the words and the understanding of what those spaces should look like and sound like. We work with some brilliant colleagues at Wayne Risa that talk about the emotional safety of our students. And I lifted this slide from one of our colleagues, Cindy Cook, and she had this slide and I thought it was so powerful. And this quote that in teaching, you can't do the Bloom stuff until you take care of the Maslow stuff. And that this is so true in the last 18 months and I'm sure you've probably already heard this quote, but I wanted to raise it again. We cannot address knowledge and comprehension and application and all of Bloom's taxonomy until we take care of our students' psychological needs. So I'm looking at that middle tier right there, the belongingness and love, that the relationships, the sense of belonging. If we want kids to really feel safe in making mistakes and bringing up questions and respectfully pushing their colleagues, it has to be a space of belonging. So how do we do that? How do we create those spaces? Well, we'd like to share with you a video that does just that. And as you watch this video, it's just 3 minutes long. We invite you to do this. How might you build a belonging classroom based on your experiences so far in your own classroom or what you're seeing on this video? And then at the end of the video, we'll ask you to share out with the rest of your group, and I'll give you a little bit more information about that. But right now, what we're going to do is watch the video. And then as you're watching, how might you build a belonging classroom so flexible grouping can be impactful? And we're going to go ahead and watch the video.
Everything about activating a child's cognitive skills begins with activating their social connectedness. The energy for learning is coming from the social connection that children have.
But in the end, we're trying to come up with an agreement.
Excellent.
We're not going to comment, question. We're only going to encourage. Because they're culturally and linguistically diverse students, I want to really make sure that we are making them feel connections. All the writing we do in our class, it's very much about them. It helps them, promotes them to find their own voice and to share their stories.
Sometimes people think every Muslim person is a target or is a terrorist.
Thank you, Anissa.
What did this show us about what we are good at as a group?
Working together, because we often argue a lot.
Today, we did an activity that was really designed to get them thinking about how they're going to support each other. I think that reiterating the idea that we're in this together, I think it's hard to find the time, but doing some team building exercises at the beginning of the year and revisiting them can really help illustrate that point.
In a belonging classroom, they have a community that may meet in classroom meetings to problem solve together, to read stories together, to tell successes and accomplishments or important events together. They celebrate like families do, things that each other have done or have experienced.
Let's talk about what we admire about some of our friends.
I admire Jazara because she is so compassionate.
And when we're talking about being compassionate and being supportive of one another, it's to build that deeper connection for everyone, just to feel like this is their school family, this is somewhere they're loved, they're nurtured, they're taken care of, they're valued.
Thank you for speaking.
The community becomes a place where you can bring your emotions, your fears, your needs. You can be honest about what's going on and know that there will be acceptance, support, and love that's available to carry you through.
We all can work together and we all can try to strategize together and create a better pathway for others to be successful. And we can make it fun.
They're working together. They take care of each other, not just personally, but academically.
We're always pushing each other.
So at this point, I just want to give you about 30 seconds, 45 seconds. What's one word that's resonating right now about how might you build a belonging classroom? And I'm going to invite you, once you have your word ready, to drop it in the chat. If you can't sum it up in just one word, feel free to use a phrase. But leaning into your experience with building a belonging classroom or what you saw in the video, what's one word or a phrase that you can drop in the chat? Slowly. Thank you, Vicki. Yeah, you've got to take that time to build those relationships. Chelsea says patience. Yes. have compassion, patience. Thanks, Deborah. Caring, concern, understanding. Definitely that work with Maslow, right? Taking the time in the beginning, consistent. Thank you, Jane, for lifting that. Taking the time in the beginning, we're going to get a lot of pressure at the beginning of the school year because some of it is self-inflicted, right? Because you're thinking, oh my gosh, some of my students might not have had what they needed last year. Or we're hearing messages within our system, within our districts that we have to get moving. We have some things that we have to cover. So being patient and consistent and making sure that we're understanding our students' needs and building those pieces in at the beginning and consistently revisiting them.
Everything about activating a child.
So I have not been practicing what I'm preaching, but we're going to do that right now. I've been talking at you quite a bit, and I want to give you some time for some small group conversation. This is your time for collaboration. So what I'd like you to do is in a moment, we're going to go into breakout rooms. I would invite you to please turn your camera on and turn your mic on, and please make sure that you share the air and know that this is a brave and safe space. So make sure that you're respecting each other's opinions and know that mistakes are opportunities for learning. So in your breakout rooms, I'd like you to just we're going to take about, Laura, how about if we say 5 minutes? 5 minutes and just with your colleagues, what's one thing that's worked for you when grouping students in your classroom that you've had success with, or something that you've seen in our presentation so far that you might take into consideration? Okay, Laura, are we ready? All right, in a moment you'll be whisked away and we'll see you back here in 5 minutes. Enjoy your time together. Sharing. All right, welcome back. We know it's never enough time in our breakout rooms, but I'm going to turn it over to Zainab.
All right, so moving on. We're going to watch a short video around group work and having some routine and protocols. So I believe I shared my sound, so I hope it works.
So today we're gonna work in partners and you're gonna choose your partner. And what are some things that we should remember when we're choosing a good partner? Maeve, Marta?
Don't choose a partner that you always choose the same partner.
Students will not necessarily work effectively in groups unless they have learned and practiced how to work well together.
Let's remember our good habits of conversation. We look each other in the eye. What else? What else do we do, David?
It is important to have norms for communication that foster respect and shared voices.
Look at our anchor chart. Remember how we talk in our discussions. Everyone has a chance to speak. We're taking turns.
Norms that are reviewed and discussed regularly.
But what are some of the norms and practices we have in these discussions? What should we remember?
Challenge or build off points instead of...
Students also need guidance on how to have effective discussions using academic language, evidence-based claims, and thoughtful analysis.
These were the things that you guys said were criteria for strong evidence. And this one over here were some strategies that we came up for finding good evidence.
Model reader. Go ahead, Anissa.
Listen to all voices. Be sure to speak.
Discussion protocols can help students by giving clear roles and guidelines for the conversation and work.
All right, and facilitator, what's your responsibility?
The facilitator is responsible for driving the dialogue of the inner circle. They will be tasked with making sure all
All right. So as you saw in this video, it's very important to have norms for communication that are reviewed and discussed regularly in the classroom. And it's very important to establish these norms from the beginning of the year so that your students are used to them throughout the year And the more you emphasize these at the beginning, the easier it will be throughout the year. Skip, okay. Oh. This visual that you see on here is an example of student roles and responsibilities during flexible grouping. And I love this one because it really provides students with specific supports, such as the visuals that you see here on the screen. Students, especially English learners, can also benefit from the examples that are provided under each role to help guide the discussion within their groups. So this is, it's by Sarah Sparks. She provided this example of the different roles that can be used, and the roles can be, different based on the concept and the content that you are teaching as well. One strategy that we use that promotes interaction within the groups is called the QTriple Essay. And this strategy really encourages structured talk within the group and the classroom. It can be used effectively across content areas and different grade levels as well. And it's specifically effective for English learners because it really engages the entire class. So how does this strategy work? So the teacher begins by asking an open-ended question. So think about this question and use rich vocabulary that is incorporated in your lesson, and keep it posted where it's visual, as a visual for your students. Make sure that that question is linked to the objectives and the goals of your lesson. And it can focus on prior knowledge or anything that you may like to have your students discuss. Then after you pose the question, you provide students with a STEM. So you tell them, when you discuss your answers, I want you to respond in this format, and you give them a sentence STEM. So this gives them the opportunity to practice any targeted academic language that you would like them to use. Then you provide them with a signal. And this is done, like you tell them, when you think you have an answer in your mind, let me know by putting your pencil down, or putting a thumbs up against your chest, or putting your finger on your nose for the little ones. And this is very important because it really builds in that wait time for English learners to be able to process the content. And then you have them share in pairs or in groups. And this really increases the student talk, and it gives them a chance to compare their answers. And it also really promotes 100% participation of your class as far as practicing that targeted language that you want them to practice. And it gives them the opportunity to do the peer rehearsal, which we talked about earlier as well. And then you assess the students by selecting specific ones to share out, to check for their understanding, or clear up any misconceptions that they may have. So based on the previous scaffolds that happened throughout this strategy, especially for English learners or struggling students, they are now prepared to respond because they had that practice and that scaffold prior to being asked to share the answer in front of the class. So there are many different ways, creative ways, to ensure that all voices are raised in small group work within whatever space that we are in. And as you know, with so much uncertainty, things may change in a blink of an eye. So some of the strategies that we can use to engage all students is passing the mic, which is done, where students have an opportunity to select the next group member that is going to share, or Wheel of Names website, where it leaves it it leaves the selection up to chance as far as who's going to share, or circle order, which is done through a Google Doc where the teacher creates a sign-up sheet where students pre-select the order in which they want to contribute to the learning. This activity that you see on the screen is another one that I really love. And the reason for that is because it really divides the work that is being done in groups, because a lot of times when we put students in groups, one person tends to do all of the work. Well, this ensures that every member of that group is contributing to the learning. And this also provides different scaffolds that you can use. So you can assign each person in the group a certain color, and they are responsible of completing the task that is associated with the color. And for any struggling learners that you have, or English learners, or even students with disabilities, you can pick the color for them. So you can say, okay, well, which colors are need the least work, or these would be appropriate for any struggling learners, and you can assign that for those students as well. So once we establish the roles and the working agreements and the protocols for engagement, we can then maintain expectations by framing the group learning within the lesson's learning targets. We can also provide opportunities for whole group debriefing, observing and assessing students' learning as they move through the small groups, and then finally really taking the time and reteaching any concepts when necessary. So these considerations help teachers support equity in small group instructional settings and promote the various benefits of collaborative learning that we have as well. So now that we understand the purpose, and then how do we go about it? So these are some driving questions that you can ask. Look for patterns or trends to organize groups and to manage the instructional and the assessment process. So think about what content standard will be the focus. What is the success criteria that you're going to use as evidence of the student's progression? And what formative assessment tools will you use, and how often are you going to measure the growth for those students? So I know earlier Mary Lou discussed the leveling of the groups. So the leveling can be done in different ways. And when it comes to leveling, we really would like to put students in different groups to have that structured talk. So one way that we can divide students and pair them up for the structured talk is by having them into 4 equal quadrants, where you have your high students in like A1, your mid-high students in A2, your mid-low students in B1, and then your low students in B2. Now, ignore all of the numbering that is within the boxes and just work within the quadrants, where you are going to then match up your students, your A1s, your high students with your mid-lows, and then your mid-high students with your lows. And this strategic way of creating these student pairs will help students not only by putting them in those specific groups, but by making sure that there isn't a large gap of academic or linguistic ability within the partners. And of course, there are many different factors that we need to take into consideration within the quadrants, such as content ability, students with disabilities, student personalities, and for example, same language peers who may be able to provide any native language support to the other peers within their groups. So pair the students horizontally and then go from there. So when it comes to assessments, we're really not talking about the summative assessments. We can use any of these different options to assess where our students are at, and then use that information when we think about putting them in small groups. So it could be based on quick write that they did. It could be based on some questions that are asked by the students. If you see that they are asking for clarification around the same topic, you can group those students together for them to be in those specific groups as well. This strategy is known as the Freyer model, or some of you have heard it as the Four Corners vocabulary activity. And this is where you have the vocabulary word placed in the middle, and then you have different categories that surround it. The traditional Freyer model uses characteristics, examples, non-examples to really increase the understanding of a specific word, but you can adapt the categories in each corner to really focus on your different content area or grade level, and then go from there. Here's another visual, also for the Freyer model, with different categories surrounding it as well. So now, how do I put my students in groups? So we can use these characteristics when we think about our students, and where they are. And can they be mentors for other students? Can they help guide their peers into the new learning? Then we can look at our students who are almost there and think about what type of support would they need from us? And then how can we help them get there? And then finally, we can focus on the students who are really not quite there yet and think about what extra support do they need from us, and what extra support can their peers provide to them as well. So really having that strategic grouping is key to ensure their success.
And Zainab, I'm going to jump in here because we do not have time for the Monty Meter, but just to give a shout out to Monty Meter, if you've not had an opportunity to use that tool yet, it is a free tool where you can ask your students to respond to questions, and there's a variety of ways that you can present them. So we invite you to take a look at that tool, but we want to make sure we honor your time. So we're going to go to the next slide. And we want to talk to you about the fact that we are just scratching the surface when we talk about flexible grouping in an hour's time, right, Zainab? There is much more that we could talk to you about. So what we did is we included a couple pieces of continuing learning opportunities. The first one is we're giving you a link to our PD request form, and we invite you to reach out, fill out that PD request form or forward it to someone within your system that you can request additional support with flexible grouping. Our team at Wayne Risa stands at the ready to help support in deeper learning around this instructional practice. We can't possibly cover all of the rich learning that's available with flexible grouping, but we would love to work with you further on that. And also that we are including a link to the additional summer learning blitz opportunities. These links are still active for tomorrow all the way through the end of our August sessions. So our last session will be on the 31st. So last but not least, we want to thank you for joining us for our session today, and let you know that we have the slide deck available for you because of these wonderful templates that Zainab has shared with you. And we also, we put it in a PDF form. We're going to drop that link. We also wanted to give you these resources. If you are a literacy leader within your system, we encourage you, use the slides, use the information to help push this forward within other spaces that might you in a grade level meeting, or if you are part of a leadership team, you could take some of this information and then help stretch the learning for your colleagues. Again, please reach out if you have any questions. We are available through the form, and we appreciate you being with us this afternoon. Thank you. We're going to hang on the link for just a minute if you want to stay and if you have any questions. But if not, enjoy